Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. And today I am very happy and thrilled to have as a guest Dr. Laurence B. Brown on the show. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, it's nice to be here.
It's wonderful to have you on as a guest. And I'll just, for those viewers who might not be familiar with Dr. Brown and his work, I'll just introduce you briefly. Dr. Laurence B. Brown graduated from Cornell University College of Arts and Sciences. This is in the United States, of course. Brown University Medical School and George Washington University Hospital residency program. He's a retired Air Force officer, the medical director and chief eye surgeon of a major eye center in the Middle East, an ordained interfaith minister, and the author of 4 books of comparative religion. And Dr. Brown's most recent book is a novel called The Eighth Scroll, which draws on the 3 Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam to create a powerful thriller involving the Dead Sea Scrolls and much more. Now, my favorite work by Dr. Brown is his book called The First and Final Commandment, a search for truth in revelation within the Abrahamic Religions, which examines, amongst many things, the doctrinal differences between the faiths and how their scriptures differ on a whole range of issues, the nature of Jesus and his life and so on. So Dr. Brown, I know you're passionate about communicating and sharing the message of Islam in fiction and in scholarly works, but why have you chosen to do Dawah via novels particularly?
Well, it's a much talked about pathway right now, actually, and I think it's basically driven by what people are reading. I think the short answer is that when I started out, I was really only interested in doing scholastic works of comparative religion. And once I did that, the First and Final Commandment was my first book, and I will totally unabashedly hold up the cover so everybody can see it. Okay.
Yep.
This is the book. Okay. This was my first book, but as you can see, it was rather thick, and so some people suggested that I cut it in 2, which is what we did with basically 2 thinner volumes. Those are Misguided and then Guided. Okay, right. These 2 books. Well, the end of the story is, though, after I had these books out, I felt like I had pretty much accomplished what I had set out to do, which was to present the information. And I started sort of casting around for other ways of presenting the same message. And I think anybody who has been into a Western bookstore notices that the nonfiction section is quite small, and the fiction section is vast. The majority of the audience are going for pleasure reading, basically, rather than information. And so I decided, well, let's approach that avenue. And so I wrote The Eighth Scroll as an action adventure, a fun book, something people would enjoy reading, but also as not only a different way of introducing the subject of comparative religion, but as a different kind of a Dawah tool. Because, for example, just imagine you have a friend or a neighbor or a colleague who you would like to present Islam to, and yet you're shy to do so because they're your boss or they're your colleague, or it's a family member for whom religious discussions are a sensitive matter. So you could go to them with a book about Islam and say, look, I really love you. I want to see the best for both of us and so on. I would like to share this with you. It's meant so much to me. I would like to share it with you. And they're going to ask, well, what's it about? And you're going to be forced to say, well, it's about Islam. But if you approach them with, and where is it? Over here. Yeah, if you approach them with The Eighth Scroll, or one of my other novels now, I have 3 novels out. It's a totally different dynamic, because you could just say to somebody, hey, look, I read something the other day. It's a fun read. I think you'll like it.
Mm-hmm.
And if they ask you what's it about, you can just say, well, did you like Dan Brown's books? It's kind of like that. Do you like James Bond? Action, adventure, intrigue, and so it's a totally different dynamic.
It certainly struck me as a similar kind of genre, the Dan Brown, the books that you mentioned. But I must say that sorry, carry on.
Well, actually, I mean, it's kind of funny, because I was writing and working on my books around the time that he was working on his famous ones, Angels and Demons, and of course, the Da Vinci Code, and so on. But I just missed the start line. He published well before I did, and it's one of those things you look back on and just say, dang. But everything has its purpose, and there's a reason for everything.
Wow, interesting. But I do, as I said already, the book, The First and Final Commandment, I think for me is your best work and your magnum opus, and your first one, actually, because it's a scholarly work that investigates as I mentioned before, the doctrinal differences between the concept of God in the different Abrahamic faiths. And you look at the life of Jesus in a great deal of detail, and the doctrine of the Trinity, and the crucifixion, and so on and so forth. And you look at the Quran, of course, and look at the various claims to truth that these different religions have. And you conclude in a very kind of, as I say, scholarly and rigorous way that Islam is the final revelation of God, and you give lots of reasons why that is the case. So I do recommend people to get a hold of this copy in the longer, big version, or the shorter ones, whichever. But it's a good resource to have for information about these different faiths, written obviously from an Islamic point of view. But coming back to your own conversion to Islam, and I know you've written about this extensively, and you've appeared on many channels, and you've talked about this. But would you want just to share your story again? And I understand there might be one or two facets of this adventure which has become for you after your conversion that perhaps you've not made public before.
Sure. Yeah. It might be a little bit of a skinny down version, because I used to enjoy talking about this, and so I hope you understand. I'll try to compress it a little, but the bottom line is that I was atheist before I became religious, and a lot of people think that I was Christian before, but I never was. So I had lived as an atheist for 30-some years, and what happened was that my second child was born with what appeared to be a lethal heart defect, and so she went straight from the birthing suite to the neonatal intensive care unit. And she was gunmetal blue from the chest to down. I mean, as dusky and as blue as my scrub suit here, maybe even more dusky. For reasons that I think everybody understands. When the body is not getting oxygen, the blood becomes blue. Arterial blood is red, right? And the venous blood is blue because it's deoxygenated. So because she had this defect in the heart, the lower body was just not getting any oxygen and was suffocating. They did an immediate ultrasound, cardiac ultrasound, and they found a coarctation of the aorta, which means that the aorta, the major vessel that comes off of the heart and carries the blood down to the body, was the lumen of the aorta was constricted, so that barely any blood was getting through. Well, the intensivist, the doctor in the intensive care ward, and I both thought that this was probably a lethal defect and that she was unlikely to survive it. And we got, it was obviously an emotional and disturbing moment. But we were in Washington, D.C. They called in a cardiothoracic consultant who was specialized in pediatrics. And while he was examining my daughter, they asked me to leave, which is pretty standard procedure. And so I left the neonatal intensive care unit, and I just made a beeline for the prayer room in the hospital. And it's kind of a funny thing when you think about it, because, as I said, I was atheist. And so, for an atheist to just go straight to the prayer room, and I just remember feeling as I left the intensive care unit that this was where I had to go. And it was the first time in my life when I ever really prayed. And I just prayed a fairly simple, what is kind of a normal format for an atheist prayer. I just prayed, "Oh God, if you are there, I need help."
Right.
And I pledged, if you save my daughter and guide me to the religion most pleasing to you, not necessarily most pleasing to me, but most pleasing to you, then I will follow.
Right.
And I was away from the intensive care unit for maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes. When I went back, when I entered, the doctors were kind of all huddled around my daughter in her little, warmer bassinet. And they looked up, and I could see from across the room, I could see the look on their faces, and I could see that something had changed. And I, didn't know what. But as I approached, this consultant just looked up at me and he said, "She's going to be okay."
Wow.
Which was a shock to me, but here's the rub. I was on the path to becoming an ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon. Okay, so I had left my my cardiothoracic training behind, what little I had. And so as he started to explain the condition, which was a patent ductus arteriosus, the memories started to click in. I started to understand how, okay, yeah, this does make sense. And okay, I can buy the medical explanation for this. And I looked around the faces and I saw that everybody else was going through the same process. Everybody else was buying his story. But what was going on in my mind was I was just thinking, you all weren't there a few minutes ago when I was making a promise to God for the first time in my life. And this happens, So she went on to become a totally normal child. Her condition reversed in a couple of days. She did not need any medicine, any surgery. She developed as a normal child. She's now married in her own life, living a typical, well-adjusted life in the West. And at the time, it put me on a pathway of just searching for the religion of truth, because I had made this promise. I had said, if you guide me, I will follow. If you save my daughter, then guide me to the religion that's most pleasing to you, that I will follow. The tough part about that was that I explored so many religions, and I just couldn't find one that made sense to me. So for 3 or 4 years, I was living this kind of tortured existence where I realized I had made a promise to God, but at the same time, I felt like I wasn't holding up my side of the bargain. I wasn't finding a religion that made sense to me. And it wasn't until I found Islam that everything basically fell into place. And I realized, this answers all my questions. This is compatible with my intellectual and religious views, and this is why I became Muslim.
Is it possible just to ask? You were born in the United States, I assume, so you would have been familiar with Christianity. Churches are dotted everywhere. Most people identified as Christian. So why did you have a problem with Christianity? I mean, it would surely be the most natural and easy religion just to take on board and start practicing. You walk into your local Catholic church, hey presto, it's all there for you. There's no cultural distance. It's accessible. So why is it? But instead of that, the obvious and easy answer, you took the most difficult answer, which is a religion that historically, shall we say, has not always had the easiest relationship with the West. So why take this more difficult route? You say it made most sense to you, but I don't quite understand why the Christian route, which was right in front of you, the easiest and obvious one, didn't make sense to you. If you understand my question.
Yeah, I do. But it's the difference between seeking convenience and seeking truth. There are a lot of quotes about this, beautiful quotes about how, many people trip over the truth and then just continue on without looking back, and truth is often sacrificed to convenience. So, yeah, I mean, most certainly it would have been very convenient, socially acceptable, easy to just duck into the neighborhood church and buy into whatever they're selling. But basically, that is what I tried. I mean, I started with studying the Old Testament. And I found in the Old Testament very clear predictions of 3 prophets to follow. And so my immediate conclusion was, well, okay, let's go look for those prophets. Instead of getting stuck on this religion, let's go looking for those prophets. So I started studying the New Testament and at the same time visiting a variety of different denominations. And I attended Roman Catholic Church, Greek Orthodox, and a variety of Protestant churches, and trying to make sense of it all. And I always came up against the same issues. I always came to a point where I would agree with some things and disagree with others, and I would say, well, okay, if I can agree with the whole package, I can accept it. But these things that I cannot agree with, they're deal breakers.
Can you give an example of one particular issue that was just a total block to you, prevented you from accepting the whole package of the Christian faith?
Well, not just one, many. I mean, the Trinity. The concept of the divine sonship, the concept of Jesus being the Son of God, the concept of original sin, and that remaining with us until this day. The whole story of the crucifixion never really made sense to me, and so on. There are many examples, but the God incarnate one is the one I think I found most, untenable.
Explain briefly why. What is the problem with the idea of God becoming a human being? After all, many people in the world believe that. So why would that?
Of course, a lot of different religions propose that, but what do they have to back it up? I mean, this is the issue. I mean, if the whole point to me was basically what became the crux of my argument in my book, the books that we talked about earlier, is just basically that if a person is going to say that they are Christian, they have to define what that means. Now, we might think that that sounds easy, but it actually isn't. Because if a person says that to be Christian means to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, well, Muslims follow the teachings of Jesus Christ as well. So are they Christian? Definitely not. Okay. But so what is your operational definition? And so when you ask most Christians what it means to be Christian, their answer is usually, well, you know what it means. So, well, I mean, I know what it means to different people, but what does it mean to you? And By the way, you can hear the adhan in the background. Is that a problem, or shall I just continue?
No, it's nice to hear. And you're actually in Saudi Arabia, aren't you, at the moment?
Excuse me.
So,
yes.
we're in Saudi Arabia live. Thank you. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, I have lived and worked in one of the two holy cities, which is Medina, for the last 22 years. Alhamdulillah, it's been a great blessing. But so the point is that when you start to look for justification within the scripture for these various beliefs, there's something very concerning when you don't find it. Okay, let's just take a simple example. Okay, the Son of God example. Yeah. Calling Jesus the Son of God.
Right.
Okay. Now back to the definition of what it is to be Christian. I basically remind most Christians, well, being Christian, doesn't that mean essentially that you follow the teachings of Jesus Christ? And they will say, yes, of course. And I will say, well, then, there's a problem, because the tenets of faith are more dependent upon the teachings of Paul than they are on the teachings of Jesus Christ. And I cannot think of a single example except that the teachings of these two conflict. I cannot think of a single example where the teachings of Paul align with the teachings of Jesus Christ. And the concept of the Son of God is a perfect example, although it's arguable whether or not Paul ever proposed that during his lifetime. That is something that was probably more contrived by Pauline theologians later. The point is this. The point is that in the Bible, 88 times, Jesus Christ refers to himself as the Son of Man. Not the Son of God, the Son of Man, 88 times. Never once does he call himself the Son of God. Well, it returns to the question, who are you going to follow? Are you going to follow what your priests and pastors, your ministers and bishops and so on are telling you, or are you going to follow what your scripture says that the prophet taught himself?
So there's a difference here between the religion of Jesus, which you're describing as very similar to Islam, and then the religion about Jesus, which is quite different. It puts Jesus at the center, worships him, and has faith in him. But that's not, you're saying, I think, the religion that Jesus himself went around preaching. He didn't go around preaching saying, I am God, believe in me and I must die for the sins of the world. He went around preaching quite a different message and calling himself by this mysterious title, the Son of Man. And I know there's much dispute among scholars about what it means, or did it have several different meanings and so on, and the authenticity of these sayings as well in the different contexts. So Paul seems to be proclaiming the Son of God, and Jesus talking about something else, almost a different religion, perhaps.
Yeah, of course, there's great argument about this, because did Paul ever really call himself the Son of God? I think if he literally called himself the Son of God, he would have been stoned, because during that time, the people were strict monotheists, and they would not have accepted that. I think it's far more likely that Son of God was a metaphorical term. Yeah, it was applied to many, many individuals at this point in time, and you actually find the term Son of God referring to multiple individuals in the Bible, and even to entire groups. So it's a major stumbling point. So this whole concept of sonship is problematic in that it was most likely metaphorical in the time that the Bible was written. But even more problematic than that is that people tend to quote Matthew 3:17, and the quote there is, "And suddenly a voice came from heaven saying, 'This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased.'" And they say, look at that, this is my beloved Son. Okay, but the Bible describes Israel, describes Adam as sons of God. 2 Samuel 7:13 through 14, and 1 Chronicles 22:10, they read, "He, Solomon, shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father and he shall be my son. Genesis 6:2, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men. Genesis 6:4, there were giants on the earth in those days and also afterwards when the sons of God, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. You find over and over children of the Lord, sons of God here, and so on. And you find, people specifically referred to, Solomon, Israel, Adam, et cetera, as sons of God. So the whole concept of a unique son of God begins to fall apart. And the thing is, you can't hang your objections just on one hook. Well, I guess you could, but the problem is when you start to encounter multiple issues such as these, then it really becomes disillusioning at the absolute least. So, for example, Trinity. You were asking me what were the issues that kept me from just going to the church next door. And as I said, the thing is, I did go and I did pose these questions and tried to seek justification, and I never got a sufficient answer. The one passage in the Bible, the Johannine comma, which is held up to support the concept of the Trinity, has now been recognized to be an interpolation. It's even the Christian scholarship has cast it out. So we're talking, of course, about the first epistle of John, 5:7-8, which read, "Three who bear witness in heaven: the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one." And that there are three who bear witness on earth: the Spirit, the water, and the blood, and these three agree as one. But the problem is that, as I said, these have been recognized as a misleading insertion. The Interpreter's Bible says clearly that this passage was not in any of the ancient Greek manuscripts, and of all of the versions, only the Latin contained it, and even then, not in any of the ancient sources. And so they identify this verse as a verse that needs to be discarded. The Schofield Bible, not the ordinary book, but the one that's reserved for the scholars, comments, quote, "It is generally agreed that this verse has no manuscript authority and has been inserted." And this is one of many comments, and it's for this reason that if you look to more modern Bibles, you find that this verse has actually been altered or actually expunged from the Bible.
True.
So all I'm saying is that there's a great deal of reasonable objection which is not adequately answered. I mean, I think the bottom line, and this became the crux of my of my book, was the many objections I had. And by the way, I just don't think that this is a unique experience. I think many Christians discover these things for themselves, the serious ones, the ones who actually read their own Bible and actually analyze it with an open mind. I think they begin to question things like the Trinity. They begin to question the concept of divine sonship and for example, just the concept of justification by faith. That rings wrong with a lot of people. A lot of people just say, "I don't get it. I mean, how can it be that simple?" I've spoken with a lot of Christians who have converted to Islam, and I find that a rather common theme there is that they discovered these issues on themselves. The difficulty then became that it put them in a position where, like me, they were searching. They realized that Christianity did not answer their religious questions, did not satisfy their spiritual code, and they didn't know where to find a religion that did. So this book, The First and Final Commandment, was my effort to explain these issues to those who were interested, and also to give satisfaction to those who needed to understand how all of this does align to an understandable conclusion.
How did you then develop, this is the next question, obviously, from an American who living in the States, trying out Christianity, finding it wanting for some really serious reasons. But how then do you move to Islam? How did you discover that faith?
Well, yeah, it was pretty much the last religion I studied. But as I said, it's the one that just it became the ultimate conclusion for me. For example, it's kind of interesting. As Christians read the Bible and they read the chain of prophethood. But let's ask ourselves why there is a chain of prophethood to begin with. Why did God need to, send anybody after Adam? Why didn't he give the message to Adam, and that message carried on to all of mankind? But he didn't do that. So why didn't the revelation stop at Abraham or at Ishmael or Isaac or at Moses or at Jesus, etc.? Why was it necessary to continue to renew prophethood and renew revelation? Well, the answer is fairly simple. It's because we as human beings are very good at corrupting revelation. We like to take out the things that we don't like and insert the things that we do like, and then hold it up and say, this is from God. Well, it's not godly for our Creator to leave mankind without guidance. And so in that situation, it is incumbent upon him to send another prophet with a clarifying revelation, right? I mean, after all, Jesus Christ is quoted as having said that he was not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Lost. What they had was no longer the pristine, unadulterated revelation that they started out with. So, you have to be fairly content to sit back and say, we have the final prophet and there is no other to follow. If you look at the Old Testament describes 3 prophets to follow. The New Testament has a passage in John in which the Jews sent their priests and their Levites to John the Baptist to ask him, who are you? And they ask, him to identify himself. And they ask, are you Elijah? And he said, no. And are you the Christ? No. Are you that prophet? No. 1, 2, 3. Mm-hmm. And then to clarify one more time, they say, well, if you are not Elijah returned, if you are not the Christ, if you are not that prophet, who are you? So even in the New Testament, we find evidence of 3 prophets predicted to follow Moses. Now let's just chalk up John the Baptist as number 1 and Jesus Christ as number 2, and that leaves us with a 3rd unaccounted for. Mm-hmm. Now, if you want to stop there, you can, but and again, this is probably getting a little bit thick for what you want to discuss, but Jesus Christ himself spoke of allos parakletos, basically God sending another parakletos, however you want to translate that. But the key term that most people ignore is allos. Allos parakletos. Allos means another. Okay, and in one passage in the Bible, Jesus Christ is identified as a paraclete. So when we're reading of God sending allos parakletos, another paraclete, and Jesus Christ is one, it makes us think of another prophet, right? Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, in Greek, there are 2 ways of saying another. One is heteros, one is allos. Heteros is another when there are 2. Allos is another when there are many. And so you have to give credence to the wisdom of the word allos. It conforms with the concept of the continuity in the chain of revelation. And it puts all the pieces together. You understand how the prediction of 3 prophets in the Old Testament progresses to 2 prophets in the New Testament, John the Baptist and Jesus Christ. believing a third that the New Testament itself predicts. You know, and then it's for each person assessing the evidence to decide for themselves whether they believe is Muhammad.
So you went through this process, this analysis, and with an open mind, an inquiring mind, you came to embrace Islam, obviously. And what happened then, and what happened after your embracing of Islam?
Well, actually, okay, interesting story. You said that there were some elements to my conversion story, and this is where some of those come into play. You know, after I became Muslim, I sort of had what we call the reformed smoker syndrome. You know, when you're a reformed smoker, you want all other smokers to follow in your path. You know, Can't you see how great I feel? I can get a full lung of air. You know, I feel so much more energetic and athletic than before, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, so I went through this period of trying so hard to get other people to see what I felt I had, you know, discovered. And about 2 years in, I had a patient. Now, as you said, I was in the Air Force. When you're in the Air Force, it's a fairly tight-knit community. The chaplain's office, excuse me, the chaplain's office might have a priest who services most of the Christians, maybe a rabbi for the Jews, but they don't have a representative of each and every faith. So they have different people in the local community who they identify as contacts within that religion. So I was the contact for Islam. So one day I was in my office and I got a phone call from a woman who just said to me, "Dr. Brown, I want to become Muslim. It's the only religion that makes sense to me. I need to do this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." But I could tell from the way she was talking, she sounded a little drunk. And so I didn't want to take advantage of that. I said, "Okay, look, come in tomorrow, you know, when she's sobered up, and let's talk about it, you know, when you have a straight mind, so to speak, and know what you're talking about." And she never came in. About, well, I should not say never, but she didn't come in. About 3 or 4 days later, a couple came in, a man and woman, who came in with their son, and their son was quite sick. Now, I knew about this boy, but I had not seen him. He had been born at the base hospital, and he had had a heart condition, and they had consulted me to come over and check him out for retinopathy of prematurity, an eye condition that can develop in premature children, especially if they're given supplemental oxygen. But by the time I went over to fulfill the consult, he had been discharged, which was kind of a surprise. But so here he was coming into my office to have this examination now. So I examined the child, and as I was examining the child, I was listening to the husband and the wife talking, and I was thinking, where have I heard this woman's voice before? No. And suddenly I realized, oh my gosh, this is the lady who called me a few days ago. So I finished my exam, told them that their son was fine, and then I said, you know, didn't you call me a few days ago saying you wanted to become? She would not let me finish the sentence. Okay, she cut me off. Now her son was out of the hospital, but he was by no means out of the woods, so to speak. He was very unhealthy looking. His skin was pale. He had oxygen, portable oxygen by nasal prongs. He had a feeding tube. He had a hep lock, you know, in his arm for ongoing intravenous medication. He was lethargic, not nearly as active as you would expect, and so on. He was clearly sick, but well enough to have been discharged. So I asked her, you know, weren't you saying you wanted to become? And she just cut me off and she said, oh, yeah. And she said, but as you can see, my son is better now, so I don't need God anymore. Ooh. Now, I pieced things together later, and, you know, basically it became clear that what had happened was that she had faced a very similar situation. Her son had been born. They had this this period of panic in which they thought that their son was going to die. She had prayed and promised and so on and so forth, and in similar fashion to how I had. But then when her son became well, that was the end of that, And we know how Allah describes in the Holy Quran how, people go through these, panic episodes. They make promises and then revert to their ways, like the sailors on the ship caught in a storm, promising that they will believe if they're saved. And then once they're on solid land, they say, "Oh, it was just a storm." Storms come, storms go, and that's that. So, but the point is that the effect that had on me was that up until that time, I had been kind of cocky about my, having figured out Islam. And it was when I saw that I realized, subhanAllah, Allah could have given her faith and removed it from my heart. It's not that I figured out anything. It's that Allah truly chooses who He guides and who He leaves astray. It's very humbling, very humbling. Yeah. So, it was a sequence of events like that served to strengthen my iman, my belief, and just make me from those points on just more and more committed to my faith. And then, of course, with the research I did and with everything else to justify my religious choice, which I've outlined in my books, my lectures, my videos, et cetera, that just cemented things for me more and more.
That's extraordinary. Just to change the subject, if we may, how serious a threat today is militant atheism to Muslims? And by which I mean, I don't just mean, I mean two things really: the ideology of atheism as aggressively propounded by people like Richard Dawkins, the English atheist, but also militant secularism. I'm in France, and we have a problem with secularism here. It's the official ideology, and I don't want to go into that so much, but more the atheist ideology. How serious a threat is it to Muslims now, do you think?
Multifaceted answer, I'm afraid. Obviously it's very noticeable. It is kind of odd, isn't it? I mean, atheists in the past used to be very quiet, and they were embarrassed about their position. Of course, there was a time when they were afraid. They could not proclaim their atheism because they would have been, imprisoned and maybe even executed. But even after the time that those punitive measures were not applied, they tend to be quiet and to themselves. This militant atheism, as you say, is something very new. Seeing atheists proselytizing atheism is bizarre and really quite shocking. What are the overall effects? Of course they are damaging. You see a lot of people gravitating in that direction because I think it's a combination of things. It's come to be seen as fashionable. They trumpet atheism as being the intelligent choice. They try to make people of faith look backward and unintelligent, as if that their choices, the choices of a religious person, are not reasoned choices. And it's potentially very destructive. I mean, I right now am focusing a lot of effort on refuting atheism, right, and taking a great deal of pleasure in doing so, because I think that their arguments are really very, very easily refuted.
So what work are you currently doing then in Dawah to engage with the threat of atheism?
Well, in the past I wrote a bunch of books, but I've given into sort of recognizing that people are much more tuned into audiovisual now than they are to books anymore. So I've started filming a series of talks refuting atheism. I have about 50 talks that are already scripted. We have finished 4 of them. We have about another 30 that have been filmed, but we have to process. So I have not uploaded them yet. I'll be uploading them to my YouTube channel when I feel it's time to launch. But just to give you, a little insight to my approach is basically to turn the atheist arguments back upon them. So, for example, the atheists like to play this game in which they talk to a person of religion and say, well, who made rocks? And, the believer says, God. Who made trees? God. Who made animals? God. Humans? God, etc. And then they say, well, who made God? And when the believer, says, well, God always was and always will be, they say, see, gotcha, you can't answer that. Well, fine, turn it around, okay, and ask the atheist, where did everything come from? Where did the earth come from? The Big Bang, and prior to that, the singularity. And where did the, local supercluster come from? The Big Bang. And the universe, the Big Bang, et cetera, et cetera. Same question. Where did the Big Bang come from? Well, they say the singularity. Okay, so where did the singularity come from? Now it's our turn to say, gotcha, you can't answer that. Yeah. The most popular model of the singularity is the Penrose-Hawking model, which proposes that prior to the singularity, there was no matter, there was no energy, there was no time, and get this, there was no space. There was not even the space in which a perfect nothingness could exist. There was nothing. Yes. Okay. So now in that scenario, what the atheists are basically asking us to believe is that a singularity arose out of nothing, exploded for reasons that they cannot explain, in a controlled fashion that led to a finely tuned universe which violates the principle of entropy. And everything we know, I mean, we all know that explosions lead to chaos, not to a fine-tuned product. And so, a believer can say, look, I believe in a creator, and that explains all else. But an atheist has to say that they believe in multiple things which lack explanation. Where did the singularity come from? Why did it explode? What were the forces that governed that expansion? What contained that expansion into what has become our finely tuned universe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now who starts to look a little silly in their blind belief? And in the same way, you can talk about evolution. Okay, the atheists track everything back to chemical evolution leading to biological evolution, and out of that one primordial cell came all else. I have one question. Where did life come from? Life. That ineffable property that makes things alive. That is not something that can evolve. That is not something that can be the process of natural selection. We as human beings have tried to Frankenstein together animals from living organisms. We've put together complete animals from functioning organisms, but there's one thing that we cannot do. We cannot make it live.
I think this is a really, really important point, Dr. Brown, because the atheist kind of takes for granted a whole swathe of realities just to get its argument going. So, the theory of evolution explains everything. Well, it doesn't explain the finely tuned laws of physics in the universe, which make life habitable in the first place. It doesn't explain the existence of life, as you've just said, in the first place. It assumes all of these things and then turns it back on the believer in saying atheism, but it hasn't explained anything. It starts from a whole bunch of givens which they cannot explain, which suggest design, intelligence, a creator, and then somehow operate within that and shout atheism. It's very implausible. Certainly the way you put it sounds it's a huge challenge to atheism to explain any of this. I agree.
Well, I think that the thing that the atheists find most difficult to to stand is themselves being ridiculed. I've watched videos in which Richard Dawkins was talking and people laughed, and he's like, why are people laughing? He's very sensitive to this, like most atheists, because they have a God. I mean, atheists have a God, something that they worship. And what that is their intellect. They have basically...
They have a holy prophet. His name is Dawkins or Darwin, depending on which one. They have a holy book, The Origin of Species, or the latest book by Dawkins. And they get very offended if people criticize their religion.
But the fact is, the fact is that actually, I believe that if you take an intelligent approach to atheism, such as what I've described, you can actually come up with more intellectual ridicule for atheism than you can for faith. Let me just as an example. Okay, we were talking about the singularity. Okay, the model of the singularity, saying that prior to the singularity there was no matter, no energy, no time, no space. There was nothing. Well, that leaves no room for anything other than a transcendent creator. Nothing. Because what you're basically saying is that a singularity that contained the everything that would become this universe appeared out of nowhere, exploded on its own, expanded and continues to expand in the universe that we now have, and nothing touched it off. It's like saying that the atom bomb at Hiroshima came from nowhere, dropped out of the sky from no process, exploded by itself, and inflicted all that damage spontaneously. Anybody who claims that, the entire world of intellectuals would stand up and say, you're an idiot. Obviously, somebody had to have made that bomb. Somebody had to have put it in motion. Somebody had to have set it off. Well, that's the argument. If you're talking about the singularity, there had to have been a transcendental creator who orchestrated everything from the beginning and controlled the process, which is why instead of getting chaos out of an explosion, which is what you normally get, we got a finely tuned universe.
That was the part I was going to mention about, because the atom bomb analogy, Hiroshima, what it produced was not the exploding bomb. It didn't produce finely ordered life. It produced destruction and death. And you mentioned the law of entropy there a moment ago in passing. Isn't that to do with how things become disordered over time, that they don't become more elegant and sophisticated, that they break down? Is that right?
Exactly.
Right. So, so we're dealing with an explosion that from the singularity point that you mentioned, which didn't just produce the chaos and but actually produced ever more ordered and sophisticated and elegant laws of physics and life and so on, which it goes against entropy. But so can you just explain what entropy is and why it's a significant point in your general argument here?
Well, okay. The concept of entropy is that in any isolated system, okay, the key here is isolated, right? In any isolated system, the entropy increases.
Right.
Meaning that the level of disorder or randomness increases. Okay. Right. But the key word is isolated. Okay. So the example I use in the talks that I give is just simple examples that we all understand. Your child's bedroom, okay, becomes progressively messier. The kitchen sink, the dishes pile up, and so on. That's an isolated system unless somebody steps in, right, and cleans the dishes, or steps in and puts the room in order. Right. Okay, when you're talking about a bomb, for example, it's an isolated system until somebody steps in and lights the wick, and boom, it blows up. Okay, and so I would have to say, no. First of all, entropy is increasing in the universe. It's just not increasing at the rate that we would expect from such a cataclysmic explosion. Right. The arguments to be made here are that with regard to the laws of thermodynamics, the first law of thermodynamics is the law of conservation of energy. You don't get something from nothing.
Right.
But of course, that's the exact opposite to what atheists are saying with regard to the origin of the universe. They're not just saying that we get something from nothing. They're saying we get everything from nothing. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then when it comes to applying the concept of entropy, once again, as I said, the key word is an isolated system. Entropy increases in an isolated system unless a higher power establishes order. So if you have a chemical reaction that's going to continue to become more and more disordered, unless, for example, the scientist in the lab steps in to contain it. All right. Now, so if all of this is beginning to sound like creation, it should, because the point is that in an isolated system where there is nothing, number one, you cannot get everything from nothing unless it's created by a higher source. Number two, you would expect to see much greater increase in entropy to what is actually happening after the Big Bang. And that could only be if there is the influence of an outside higher power controlling things. Now, the more relevant question, I think, at this point is really, well, are the processes of the Big Bang, is the concept of the Big Bang and is the concept of natural selection compatible with any religion? And the answer is yes. That religion is Islam. Islam is the only religion I know which is compatible with the concept of the Big Bang and is compatible with the concept of natural selection. There are provisions. Okay, well, we just don't say that the Big Bang happened, out of nowhere. No, we say that it was, if this was the path by which our Creator brought the universe into existence, this was under His design. Same thing with evolution. There are some steps here that we have to clarify, that human beings were a separate creation and so on. But I have no problem with the concept of natural selection. I have no difficulty imagining that, dinosaurs walked the earth, that dogs used to be big and now they're small, horses used to be small and now they're big. I even have no problem with the concept that, a species creation, although I would say the evidence is against it. But the point is that you can believe in evolution and be a Muslim. You can believe in the Big Bang and be a Muslim. You don't have to erase your intellectual foundation. Mm-hmm. Let us remember, Islam was the fountainhead of the sciences. Look back, choose your science. Choose your science. Physics, chemistry, mathematics, chemistry, astronomy. Choose your science. It all came from the Muslims back in the intellectual revolution of that period of time and the centuries that followed.
Will you be covering that in your videos, by the way, the history, the origins of these sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, in the Islamic world? Because there are these roots in the Islamic world.
I give it passing mention. The main point I make is that my choice of religion intimately involved looking for a religion that matched not only my spiritual template, but also matched my intellectual requirements. Mm-hmm. Okay, I wasn't going to accept it. Sorry to say it so bluntly, but a stupid religion. I wasn't going to give up my capacity for critical thought just to embrace a religion. I think that's one of the reasons why, sort of going full circle back to, some of the things that you mentioned earlier. I think that's one of the reasons why I never bought into Christianity. 4 years of searching different sects of Christianity, trying to find one that made sense. And the crux of it never made, for example, the concept of original sin. Mm. Well, if original sin were true, then why do we find in the Old Testament it saying that the son does not, inherit the sins of his father? Original sin would have been before that. Original sin was from the beginning. And here you have a book of Revelation saying that, the son will not inherit the sins of the father. Yeah. And then you find Jesus Christ, speaking of the children and saying, suffer the children not to come unto me, because for of thine is the kingdom of heaven. Well, how can the kingdom of heaven be for the children if they're born with original sin?
Yeah.
I mean, you can reason out so many things like this, and you come to the conclusion that in order to embrace this way of thinking, you have to take something from your intellect and discard it. Well, I don't accept that. When I see that I'm being told I have to accept original sin, which just doesn't make sense to me. Okay, if my father committed a crime, I don't expect to go to prison for that. But then accept it even when the prophets themselves are giving the evidence against it in your own book of Revelation. I mean, come on, really. I mean, you're asking me to suspend critical thought, to buy into your theology when you yourself cannot even explain it.
Mm-hmm. No,
that's what I refuse to do.
Yeah. Well, I do hope your videos will be published soon. I certainly look forward to watching those. Now, how many again are you planning to do? It was a very large number, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, like I said, I've got 51 episodes
51. Wow.
Scripted, but they're all short. I mean, they're all 5 to 10 minutes because people nowadays don't really want to stick with a 1 hour video. So soon, inshallah. Soon they'll be out, inshallah.
Look forward to seeing those. Well, this might be a natural time to draw this to a conclusion. But in conclusion, Dr. Brown, is there anything you wanted just to share with us about your work, or you've mentioned your future work, of course, and publishing the videos, but about your general thoughts on Dawah, perhaps?
Well, I guess one thing that I would say is that I have changed a lot in my way of making Dawah. I used to be much more fiery, much more outspoken, much more argumentative. And I've found I've become much less argumentative over time. One of the reasons I wrote my book is because I got tired of talking. I wanted to just be able to tell a person, look, here it is. If you want it, it's there. I mean, if you want to just fight with me, I'm not really interested in that. But if you want to know what I'm thinking, there's the book. It's there for you if you want it. And that's just served me very well over the years. Another thing that I would remind people of is just the power of a book in the process of making Dawah. A book has a physical presence. It sits there. It invites the reader to eventually crack the cover. I've known of a number of people who have taken my book or other books, not necessarily mine, and even in some cases, people who have been given a Quran or a book of religion, who it's literally sit with them for years. Mm-hmm. And something at some point, stimulates that person to open that book and look at it for the first time. And so I remember one man who described to me how he had a used copy of the Quran that was gifted to him by a neighbor. He said it sat so long until it collected dust. And one day he read Al-Fatiha and just said, this is it. And wow. Other stories of people who have, left a book out hoping somebody in their house will read it, and, and. So a book has a physical presence, and it's useful. Mm-hmm. One thing I would say, however, is just for everybody out there to remember that the process of Dawah is a process of getting to know the person you're talking with. You have to understand what they're thinking. You have to understand what their priorities are. Mm. You have to understand that Allah guides those he means to guide. We don't have to get a 5-minute shahada, which is something that I'm rather critical of. The idea is to point a person in the right direction, and that can only be done with intellect, good manners, and approaching dawah in a calm, peaceful manner. I think that's all I would say.
That's a beautiful summary of how to give dawah well, actually. Calmly, respectfully, and understanding the person you're talking to, not just speaking at them, but addressing them as a person and understanding the level they're at, and so on. Very, very good. Thank you.
And being just kind of relaxed about it. I mean, I remember one time one person asked me, they learned that I'd become Muslim, and they asked, "What's that all about?" And I used to, when somebody asked me, I used to just jump on them, and I was so eager to talk, so eager to unload all the information I had, and so on. But I've just changed. Like I said, this person asked me, "Well, Islam, what's that about?" And I just said to them, "You don't want to know." and the interesting thing is that the guy actually paused. It forced him to think. It's a soft sell tactic, I guess you could say, but it forced him to think if he really did want to know or not. Was he just being socially polite or what? And he actually paused and he said, "No, I do want to know. What is that about?" And he asked me a few more questions, and I just did the same thing. I just said, "Look, you're not serious. I mean, you can't possibly be sincere." And, each time he paused, thought about it, and came back at me, and we ended up having a very nice discussion. So, you just have to relax about it and, be trusting that if Allah means for a person to, be guided in that direction, Allah will guide him with or without you.
Well, that's a perfect conclusion, actually, those last words. This ultimately not in our hands. God will guide whom he will to the truth. We carry words, but he makes them effective. So, Dr. Laurence B. Brown, thank you so much. An outstanding, one of the world's outstanding dawah carriers, if I can say that without meaning to embarrass you. And I'm sure we all look forward to watching these videos, which certainly promise to be absolutely fascinating. So thank you very much, Dr. Brown, for your time. And till next time.
Very nice to be with you. Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. All the best.
Thank you.